like doing a PowerPoint presentation, because every time I tried to write it, it went wrong. So, my name is Scarlett Cardle, I'm from the School of Law. My research looks at public international law, international institutions, and EU external relations. So, the part of my research I'm going to talk to you about today is to do with what we call the law of international responsibility. And it was the focus of my PhD, and it's been the focus of a number of pieces of research and work that I've done since then. In broad terms, what I look at are the limitations of international responsibility, the problems with it, and how the principles in themselves don't really work and don't really fit when we look at the actors that are now active at the international level. So before I explain that a little bit more and how I look at that and what I do and how it works, it's important to give you a little bit of a background, because I'm aware that we're not all lawyers and we're certainly not all international lawyers. So the law of international responsibility is an area of law that looks at holding people responsible for breaches at the international level. So if a state commits a wrong against another state, the wronged state can seek to hold the wrongdoing state responsible for those actions. They can gain reparations, compensation, etc. And that is the traditional form that that law has evolved from. Okay, so bilateral sovereign state relations. This state has bombed my ship, please give me some money. It's kind of how it works. The problem that we now have is that that's not really how the international system works anymore. It doesn't solely work within the realms of sovereign states anymore. So not only do we have states, we have international organisations like the UN, we have strange institutions like the European Union, we have non-governmental organisations that are active in a variety of countries across borders, International Committee of the Red Cross being a fantastic example of that. We also have philanthropic organisations, so you have people like Bill Gates, who set up a substantial foundation that actually has a greater turnover than a substantial number of countries around the world. Another one I discovered recently, apparently the rapper Akon, best known for Smack That, doesn't just sing about smacking that. He funds the provision of electricity in a number of Central African states and is providing electricity to millions of people. But these are substantial actions, and when you have substantial actions, things can, intentionally or unintentionally, go wrong. And when things do go wrong, what I look at is there should be some kind of responsibility for that. There should be some ability to hold someone to account. Now, a lot of the time you can look at this and say, well, it sounds very theoretical, surely these people are just doing very lovely things, isn't it nice? We have numerous examples of wrongs being committed. The most prevalent, the most well-known are those committed within the realms of the United Nations. So since the UN was set up, you can trace right back to the 1950s examples, claims of United Nations peacekeepers committing sexual abuse in territories where they are active. So you have a whole trail of evidence back to the 50s of examples of abuses. More recently, you've got some very important, very interesting research of the knock-on effects of that, with people doing research into what they call the blue helmet babies, the left behind, the consequences of this abuse. You also have something I've written on quite recently, examples of wrongs that you could look at as intentional, you could look at as unintentional. So one thing that I've written on recently is the World Health Organization and its activities in addressing Ebola. So the World Health Organization has a number of obligations, responsibilities with regard to protecting people in the field of global health. It acted incredibly slowly in what it did in terms of the West African Ebola outbreak, and it is continuing to act incredibly slowly in regard to the DRC's Ebola outbreak. Does that mean that it is then allowing that to perpetuate and carry on and spread even further? So broadly, that's the background. Now, what I do, what I look at, I am a doctrinal legal researcher. I sit at a desk, I read things, I think about them, I compare them, I discuss them, I write about them. I don't interview people, I don't do exciting things like that, so I can't talk to you about different examples of things like that. Predominantly, the research that today's talk is about is to do with the development of new principles. So the international system recognised that this was a problem, in particular in relation to institutions, which is where you can look at the UN. And it sought to develop more principles on this. Right, so let's create some law where we can hold these people to account. But the way in which it did that, and this is what I sought to look at and examining those principles, was it took the original principles that we had in relation to states, and in a lot of them, it rubbed out the word state and it wrote the words international organisation. So they don't really work that well. They don't really fit, they don't really function. And that was originally what I looked at in relation to my PhD. Since then, what I've looked at is to take that further and see, well, what's happened since then? Can we really say that they don't function? Can we really say it doesn't work? Well, what we can look at now is any cases that have come out, any examples of this. And there have been a number of them that have come up. But interestingly, all of the cases that use these principles use them to go back to talk about the states. None of them use them to hold institutions to account, for various other reasons, which are a bit complex to go into in the realms of a 12-minute presentation. So what am I looking at now? Well, I've looked at institutional responsibility. I'm currently working on a joint paper on the actions of humanitarians, in particular the International Committee of the Red Cross, and holding them to account for their actions. More broadly beyond that, I'm looking at the broader concept of responsibility at the international level, and can we seek to find some way forward for addressing what are a number of substantial gaps in responsibility and accountability at the international level. So, any questions?